Hello, let's talk about computing gross pay for salaried and hourly employees and discuss commission pay and piece rate work. Let's start first with salaried workers. Salaried workers are employees employed in highly technical, qualification driven positions within a company, and they're classified as being exempt from the Fair Labor Standards regulations. But not everyone can be a salaried worker. As of January 1st, 2024, to be considered an exempt employee in the United States, a worker must be paid a minimum salary of $684 a week or $35,568 per year. In California, exempt workers must be paid a salary that is at least twice the state's minimum wage. Accountants, lawyers, executives, those are the type of positions, typically administrative, that are considered salaried positions. Please keep in mind that some salaried workers can be subject to overtime regulations by law. They're called salaried non-exempt workers. To obtain the hourly amount for a salaried worker, we divide the annual salary by the number of hours per year. How would we exactly calculate the hourly amount if we need it? We would divide the annual salary by the number of hours per year. Here's an example. Sometimes an example is just a lot easier to look at than when we're just talking about the calculation. So here is a salaried employee, and very important, a non-exempt employee who is earning $1,000 per week. And what we see here is that it's specified that this employee has a 45-hour work week. What does that mean? Well, it means that typically the employee gets only overtime when he or she has worked more than the 45 hours. Okay, a non-exempt means that this employee is subject to overtime. In some states, the salary can be reduced if the non-exempt employee works less than the standard number of hours per week. But let's look at this particular employee. So we would calculate the hourly rate on weekly wages by taking the weekly salary. So in this case, it's a weekly salary of $1,000 and divide it by the standard 45-hour work week. Some employees may have a 40-hour work week, some have 37 and a half hours. This employee has 45 hours. When we complete that calculation, we find $22.22 per hour as the hourly rate. Let's look at the next example. The next example is similar. Sometimes you're given the annual salary rather than the weekly salary. So in this case, you would take the annual salary divided by the number of weeks and divided by the standard number of hours per week, in this case 45. We come up with the very same exact result, $22.22 per hour. What would the pay be if the employee who has a standard 45-hour work week works 50 hours? We would take the base pay, and we already know that, right? It told us right here at the top, it's $1,000 per work week for 45 hours. All right, so a $1,000 base. And then for 5 hours extra, we need to calculate the overtime rate, which is $22.22 times 1.5 or time and a half, coming up with $33.33 for overtime pay of $166.65 and total pay of $1,166.65. Let's take a look at this other example. In this case, we have an exempt employee who earns $104,000 per year and has a standard work week of 40 hours. Some exempt employees are eligible for overtime, but this employee is not. To calculate the hourly wages on an annual wage, we would take the annual wage and divide it by 52 weeks and then divide it by 40 hours. Why 40 hours? Well, we're told this employee has a standard 40-hour work week. The result is $50 per hour. What would happen if this employee works 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week? What if the employee works 35 hours per week? Well, if the employee works more than the standard hour work week, there is no extra pay regardless of how many hours, no extra pay. That's why it's called salaried and exempt from overtime. If the employee works less than the 40-hour work week, then there's typically no reduction in pay, but take that as a general rule. There are some states that allow employers to reduce the pay if the employee works less than the standard work week. Let's look at a few more examples just to keep practicing. This employee is salaried who earns $44,000 per year and has a standard 40-hour work week. What is her hourly rate? We take the $44,000 divided by 2,080, and you might wonder, where does that come from? Well, it's a shortcut calculation by just taking the 40 hours per week times 52 weeks per year. Okay, I can only use that if somebody has a standard 40-hour work week. In this case, we will come up with $21.15. What would happen if this employee had the same rate per year, but in this case, a standard 37.5-hour work week? What is her hourly rate? In this case, we would have to divide 44,000 by 37.5 hours per week and 52 weeks per year and come up with $22.56. Let's look at two more examples. Ivan is a salaried, non-exempt employee who earns $37,400 for a standard 35-hour work week. During a biweekly pay period, he worked 3.5 hours overtime. What is his overtime hourly rate? In this case, we'll take the annual salary divided by 52 and then divided by 35 because that's the standard work week and come up with 20.54945 times 1.5 to get the hourly overtime rate of $30.82. Here's one more example. Chanda is a salaried, non-exempt worker with a standard work week of 40 hours. During the last weekly pay period, she earned $105.98 in overtime pay for 5 hours of overtime. What is her annual salary? This is a little tricky. It's kind of like a backwards calculation. You take the overtime that she got, and we know she got paid for 5 hours. So we'll convert $105.98 first into an hourly overtime pay by dividing it by 5 hours. And then we'll divide it by 1.5 to get her regular rate, which is 14.1307 times 40 hours to get her weekly pay times 52 to get her annual pay. And the result is $29,391.86. What about hourly workers? How are they different from salaried workers? Well, hourly workers are paid for any hours or fraction of the hours they work and receive overtime for hours worked in excess of 40 hours according to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Shifts can vary. Most people work 8 hours, but companies may offer different work shifts and workday length, such as 4 10-hour shifts or 5 8-hour shifts. There are definitely a lot of companies that offer different shifts. It also can depend on what kind of company you work for. Sometimes it takes a long time to set up machines. If it takes 2 hours to set up certain machines, you're only getting 6 hours out of that shift. in terms of full working hours. Sometimes it really makes sense to just extend the hours per shift to perhaps 10 hours so that you can get more out of that shift. State regulations may require the company with 10-hour shifts to file an election to pay no overtime. The main reason for filing the election should not be the avoidance of overtime pay, but rather the economic benefit of set-off times. An employee may also be working in more than one job classification, especially in small businesses that can happen all the time. So that means that the hourly rate that the employee receives may vary. And here's an example of that. Evan works as a clerk in the human resource department for a company. She receives one rate for that of $15.65, but she also occasionally fills in as a receptionist. And then she receives $1.50 more, and that's called an hour differential. So this week she worked 35 hours in HR and 5 hours as a receptionist at the front desk. What is Evan's gross pay for the week? We would multiply 35 hours at $15.65 and the 5 hours at $17.15 because she gets an hour $1.50 more per hour as a receptionist. So we multiply that out, and that's $85.75 for a total amount of $633.50. Some employees earn commissions, sometimes on top of their regular salary, sometimes that's the only pay they receive. Commission always relates to a company's sales revenue. It's really important to remember that it's based on how much somebody sells, and the employee has to be materially involved in the sale of the product, but does not participate in manufacturing the product. Commission-based employees may be exempt or non-exempt, so both can be the case. The employee can be an inside salesperson or an outside salesperson. An inside salesperson means that the customer comes to the business and then the employee must receive at least the minimum wage during each pay period. An outside salesperson is a person who visits the customer's place of business. They're exempt from the FLSA minimum wage provision. So here we have an outside salesperson. We know that the FLSA doesn't apply. The person makes 8% commission on all sales. She had $4,650 in sales for one pay period. What is her gross pay? And does her employer need to contribute towards her pay to meet the FLSA standards? So that answer is already no, because we learned that for outside salespeople, the FLSA does not apply. So here the answer is no. Take the number of sales that the person made times 8%, and that's $372. Perhaps not that great of a sale week. But let's look at Byron. He's an inside salesperson. He earns an annual salary of $132,600 plus a 5% commission on total sales that he makes during the pay period. So during a biweekly period, he had $92,820 in sales. How much is he getting paid? Well, first of all, we need to calculate his biweekly pay based on his annual salary. I come up with $5,100, and then we'll calculate the commission of $92,820 in sales times 5%, which comes up to $4,641 for a total pay of $9,441. What about piece rate work? I'm not sure how common piece rate work is, but it is one of the oldest pay methods. So in a piece rate pay, you're paid on your output. The employer receives compensation for units manufactured or actions performed. It could be anything. It could be based on the number of units manufactured, but it also could be based on how many cakes you decorate or make, or how many social media posts you generate for a company. It just must be quantifiable output for piece rate work. In this case, the employees are generally non-exempt and are subject to FLSA minimum hourly rates. It's important to compute the employee's hourly wage for the period to ensure that they receive at least the minimum wage. So that's important. Let's look at two examples. John and Sarah both work in Nebraska and they actually work together. John is a piece rate worker who receives $15 per completed piece of work, and Sarah gets the same amount. During a 40-hour work week, he completes 30 pieces, so his pay would be $450 because 30 pieces times $15 is $450. Well, we'll calculate the hourly wage by dividing 450 by 40 hours, and we come up with $11.25. In Nebraska, the minimum rate is $9 per hour, so we're okay. He receives enough based on the piece rate pay to be above Nebraska's minimum wage. What about Sarah? She only made 15 pieces, so her pay is only $225. And when we divide the $225 by 40 hours, we come up with $5.63. In this case, it's not enough. She has to make at least $9, which is the minimum wage rate in Nebraska per hour. And so her employer would have to actually pay her more. He would have to pay $360, which is 40 hours times $9 per hour. Let's summarize what we learned. The most common pay types are salaried and hourly. I'm not quite sure how it is in other countries, but certainly here in the US, salaries and hourly are the most common ones. Hourly employees and salaried non-exempt employees receive overtime pay. Employees can receive two different hourly rates for different work. Remember the person that worked in HR and worked as a receptionist? So you can have two different hourly rates. Two additional pay types are commission and piece rate work. Inside salespeople are subject to the FLSA, whereas outside salespeople are not subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act. All right, that wraps it up. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon.